SNES is racing into the future. All this and more coming up on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
Show me where it hurts.
Windows 3 shows its true colours.
And letting out the magic smoke.
All this and more coming up on this week's show.
Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.
Hello, Reese. How are you?
Hello, Dave. I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm great. You will notice, viewers and listeners, that Neil is not with us this week. Neil sadly was not able to make it. Illness in the Neil household and things running behind and all the rest of it. I'm not particularly great for time either, but to make sure the show goes on, we brought in at very short notice, after a full working day, none other than Reese.
The show must go on, Dave. I'm
show
happy
must
to
go
do
on.
my bit.
How's your week been?
It's been good, yes. If I could just go straight in with the plug for my own channel, Control-Alt-Reese, I did release a video. I'm not asking for permission here. I'm just going to say it anyway. I did release a video all about the Pico Gus, about a sound card, based on the Raspberry Pi. And it was also my birthday this week. And I got this lovely present from my friend Sam.
So what's the present?
Glass.
Atari pint glass.
Yes.
It looks nice as well. So is it etched? Is that what it says? It's etched with Atari on it?
It is etched, yes. It's kind of more of a stein than a pint glass, I guess. So it's got the handle on it as well.
Right.
But, a very thoughtful present. So
I did enjoy your Pico Gus video. Pico Gus, for people who don't know, is an all-in-one solution for PC sound on an ISA expander, ISA if you want to call it that, not ISA, that does...
ISA.
It came out to do... We've talked about it before. It was originally called the Pi Gus, the Pigus. Which is why it's got a pig on it, called Dave. And it was originally that, and it became the Pico Gus, and it does a Gravis ultrasound, but it also does all sorts of other things. Even though you brushed over it in your video, it does the 2000 network card, which is,
yes,
I think that's a big deal.
I couldn't possibly cover every single thing that it does, because it just does so much, and the video would have been about 3 hours long. But yeah, the NE2000 network support, obviously that's kind of a new experimental thing. But yeah, it's, and of course, because it's all software based, there's so much potential there for adding new sound cards and all sorts of stuff. As
far as I'm concerned, that is going to be the answer for everything on DOS sound. I don't know there's anything that theoretically couldn't do, if that makes sense. And it does already so much. It's absolutely fantastic. I mean, I've got the Orpheus 2, which is real hardware with all the right chips on it, much more expensive. It's the real thing. But I can't slate Ian's device. Absolutely amazing. Absolutely brilliant. I have been networking, upgrading my internet to 1 gigabyte, and this is a 2.5 gig switch that I need to install. I need to label all my Ethernet. I've got Cat 6A in every room of the house, so I need to go and label them all now, because I didn't think when I terminated them all that I needed to know which one was going to which port, and now I'm going to have 2.5 gig and 1 gig and maybe even fast Ethernet to save on power. So I need to do all that, and that's what I've been doing this week, and I haven't had a minute. Shall we get into the show, Reese?
I think we should.
There's a mystery in the world of retro, and seemingly nobody knows the answer. Something is going wrong with all of the Super Nintendos in the world. But don't let me scare you. They're not being taken away. They're not going to stop working. It's nothing serious. Don't worry. The SNES might be the most important console Nintendo have made. I'm going to make an argument for that. Like I did I made the argument for the Spectrum being most important. It may not agree with me. I've got a point, I think. They've certainly got a top three, which is the Switch, the NES, and the SNES. I think those are the three most important ones they made. And the SNES, I think, is probably the top thing in retro. They sold 50 million of them. Huge number of people and memories of them. And for most of the games that people remember on the SNES, the games weren't battling against the limits of what the console could do. They were comfortably able to perform in the console. And as a result of that, I think they've aged beautifully. The games are fantastic as they are in the SNES, and you don't feel, well, if only this was more advanced, it could do it properly. You don't feel that. The NES before it actually sold about 10 million more units than the SNES, and it's still a huge thing in retro. And there's actually plenty of games in it, too, that stand the test of time. But I think I still prefer the SNES because things like Grisor 3, Turtles in Time, Donkey Kong Country 1 and 2, Super Metroid, of course, some of the people's favourite JRPGs, although not a favourite category of mine. For me, I'm more interested in the platformy games on it, which is, I think, is the SNES's strongest point. And although I'm not massively into them, I think if you want the best platform games, you've got 16-bit consoles and you've got the arcade to go for them. That's the best place to go for them. The NES set things up for many of the long-running, well-loved franchises Nintendo has, but they all seem to catch their stride on the SNES, and that's the best place to play, I think. The best versions of these, the best games in these franchises, the ones that people say, this is the one to play if you're going to play any of them. Play Castlevania 3, whatever it is, on the SNES. I've probably got that one wrong. So going to today's submission, it came from 42 Nobody 42, and we're going to talk about what's gone wrong and why. The audio processing unit, the APU, within the SNES, the Super Nintendo, uses a ceramic resonator. Now, you might hear that called a clock chip, or you might hear it called a quartz crystal. It's not strictly that, but it's the same thing, same function. In operation, mechanical vibrations induce an oscillating voltage in the attached electrodes due to the piezoelectricity of the material. The thickness of the ceramic substrate determines the resonant frequency of the device. And as you can probably tell, both of those last two sentences came directly from Wikipedia. In other words, you can use these to generate a timing signal for computers. All computers that I know of rely on these or similar devices for timing. So when you hear people talk about an 8 megahertz Atari ST, it uses a clock crystal to generate that 8 megahertz or a multiple of it, the 3.5 megahertz ZX Spectrum, that type of thing. Well, it turns out that the speed in the SNES is changing. It's supposed to be 0.032 megahertz or 32,000 hertz. But someone's noticed theirs is running faster. And it's not the case that theirs is an outlier. They're all running faster. Everyone has the same problem. And not only that, but it's getting worse over time. They're slowly drifting away from spec, starting at 32,000 hertz, and the midpoint in the data for the current ones is 32,080 hertz, which is 0.25% faster. So I'm imagining Tecmo doing a video on a record player where he measures how fast it is, and 0.25% from Tecmo would have been absolutely fine. He wouldn't be worried. And yes, it doesn't matter at all. Your SNES is fine. If it's running 0.25% faster on the sound, it doesn't make any difference at all. And in fact, the SNES speed, the overall speed of the machine, is only very rarely dictated by the audio processing unit. So even when it is running slightly fast, it's not affecting the overall speed most of the time. So people have calculated, because they're thinking about speedrunners here, because this affects speedrunners, one of the most popular things to do in the SNES, it seems, it will make less than 1 frame difference over an entire game speedrun. So it just doesn't matter. But it's interesting. Over in Blue Sky, TaskBot requested people test their SNES, and they had 143 responses before he said, okay, that's enough, which were carefully recorded to show what it looks to me to be a normal distribution curve. In other words, heaped in the center, and there's outliers as you go further out, but the normal distribution curve seems to be centered around 32,080 hertz. In other words, 80 hertz faster, a tiny amount fraction, with the SNES getting a little bit faster if you warm it up first. So I just want to reiterate, this won't affect your hardware or your enjoyment of the SNES in any way at all. It doesn't signal the impending doom of the real hardware. There's nothing you need to do. But it's interesting, it's unexplained, and we don't know why. Nobody has an answer for it yet. So, Rhys, what did you think of this? And if people want to hear that imperceptibly faster audio, what should they play to do it?
Yeah, really interesting story. This is one that had come up on my radar anyway, and it's fascinating because I know, obviously, I'm more of an Atari guy than a Nintendo guy, and I know that I know some of the Atari consoles, like the 2600 and the 7800, the actual color palette changes as they warm up. So they start off with certain colors, and then as they get warmer, the colors change. And they've even gone so far as that the cores in Mister, you can actually choose the temperature of the console. So I'm wondering if this is something that's going to be added to like the SNES Mister core. You know, they could have it so there's a 0.25% speed up for certain age consoles or something, maybe to simulate this.
I was going to suggest maybe they could put that option in and then have it do nothing at all because no one can tell.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I play instruments and have done most of my life, and I like to think that I have quite a good. I'm not going to claim that I have perfect pitch, but, you know, I am quite sensitive to changes in pitch and stuff. And I don't think even I would notice, you know, a quarter of a percent.
Do you notice the colour difference on your Ataris?
Yes, it is noticeable, actually. Yeah, it is. I mean, obviously, it kind of gradually warms up over time, so you don't really notice. But when I'm doing like...
Something in my head saying it's the reds and purples. Am I making that up?
Yes, I mean, but because I have the YouTube channel, I do a lot of capture from original hardware. So you can actually notice it. You know, if I start the console up from cold and start capturing something, then by the end of it, the colours are actually ever so slightly different. So it is something that I've definitely noticed,
but not to the detriment of the experience.
No, it's just it's just a side effect of the kind of analog nature of a lot of this stuff, I guess. But yeah, really interesting. I mean, you asked for some game recommendations. I'm not really an expert on the SNES. I did, when I got my Mr. Multi-System, I did make a point of kind of checking out some of the more popular games on the Super Nintendo. So stuff like F-Zero, like the Super Mario All-Stars, Mario Kart, obviously. But it's all kind of... That
was the first Mario Kart, the one that keeps going back. Everyone loves playing when you're round at your brother's house and playing against these kids. Well, I am. Mario Kart there. The original Mario Kart was the SNES.
Yeah, it's all, like you said, I mean, it's all aged very, very well, all that kind of era of Nintendo stuff.
I think that's why we've had a few stories recently with people who didn't grow up with the SNES are going to the SNES and playing games on it because the games are good enough that you don't play them feeling as if it's limited. Like when I play some old role-playing games from the 80s, there's a very, very much a feeling that these games are quite limited on the machines I'm playing. I still enjoy them, but I don't think they're accessible to people who didn't play them back in the day. Whereas SNES games, and to a greater or less extent, NES games are.
Yeah, I mean, like anything on the Amiga, you know, none of that's aged particularly well, has it?
No, it's all rubbish, isn't it? Let's not do that. Let's not do that. We'll get comments. I'll level up by saying that the Atari ST, a lot of the library of the Atari ST hasn't aged so well, but some of it has. Dungeon Master, I'd say, is timeless. Dungeon Master is timeless. Speedball 2. There's games like that are great no matter how old it is, but not all of them. Quite often you can be playing a role-playing game on the Atari ST and thinking the UI isn't so great, it could be better. And you have to go to 90s role-playing games, to 2000s role-playing games to really see how it's working. But if you're talking about a platform game, like a Mario game, or a more complicated one than that, then the technology was already there in 1990. So boot up your SNES and tell me in the comments if you think you can detect the sound processing 0.25% faster than your memories from the early 90s. And if you can, then I've got a bridge to sell you. PCBWay are sponsoring this podcast. They also sponsor you as well, I think.
They do sponsor me. I mean, did you know that they have 10 years of experience in the PCB fabrication business, Dave, and that they also offer complimentary services, including 3D printing, CNC machining, and injection molding?
I knew that already. They'll pick and place your stuff. They're very good at it. They run a tight ship. They have loads of different colours for your PCBs. And of course, the thing that Neil and I like the most about PCBWay is the library of different things. You can browse through that, pick up a little thing. Soldering up your first project is easier than you think it will be. Solder mask and pads, when you put the solder on, it wants to go in the right place. It's much easier than you think, and PCB waste is the way to do it.
You could even pick up a Pico-Gus. Just
you
saying.
can. A Pico-Gus, you could do a Pico-Gus on PCB way.
When we got our first family PC way back in Christmas 1994, it was a 486 DX266 with 4 megabytes of RAM, a 2-speed CD-ROM drive, and an ESS audio drive Sound Blaster clone. And that machine, believe it or not, had a 300 megabyte hard drive in it. Good old-fashioned mechanical hard drive.
Was your dad rich?
I think he somehow acquired it through his employer at the time.
That is a really, for 1994. That is a really good spec.
Yes, I don't think I quite appreciated it at the time, but it wasn't even my first experience with a DOS PC either. So he actually had a work PC before that, which was an Amstrad 286 that he used to bring home at the weekends. And I remember playing Wolfenstein 3D with the PC speaker.
An Amstrad 286 home at the weekends.
Yep, so a full-blown desktop PC. He used to stick it in the back of his Austin Montego estate or whatever it was he had as a company car at the time. He genuinely did have one in a really horrible shade of green. And yeah, just unload it all and set it up in on the dining room table every weekend to do his spreadsheets and stuff. So
that's amazing.
Anyway, you've derailed my story, Dave. But yes, as the only other member of the household interested in computers, it was basically my PC. And that's where I got some of my earliest experiences messing around with DOS, specifically DOS 6.22, tweaking the config files, trying to get things to work, and to the frustration of my dad and the rest of the family, even occasionally completely screwing things up and leading to a full format and reinstall. And I think many of us who were kind of kids around that time have had that experience and that mad panic of completely breaking the family PC. But hey, I guess it led most of us to where we are today. And of course, the contemporary version of Windows at the time was 3.1, which was released in 1992. And that was the GUI of choice for said family PC. So that gave me my first taste of some of my creative experiences on the PC, like making stupid pictures in Paint Shop Pro, making flyers and banners and things in Microsoft Publisher, firing up Encarta to do my homework, and perhaps most importantly, my earliest experiences of the internet, courtesy of AOL, although I think that was kind of a year or so later, kind of 95, early 96-ish. So I think it's fair to say that Windows 3.1 holds a lot of nostalgia for me, and it was a real milestone on my journey to becoming the tech-obsessed nerd that I am today. And that's why this story was of particular interest to me. So this was submitted to the subreddit by King of Your Fart, one of my favourite This Week in Retro subreddit usernames, and I don't think it's the first time I've picked a story from that particular user just because of the name. And this the submission itself is actually a video which is from a smaller channel called Amores, so please do be sure to go and check out the link in the show notes. Go and show them some love. And it's a demo of a video driver called VBE SVGA.drv. And this has been published by someone over called PluMGMK over on GitHub. It's quite the mouthful, this. And what it is, getting to the point, is a modern graphics driver for Windows 3.1, which, as mentioned, was released way back in 1992. So modern
not
PCs...
The driver.
No, not the driver, Windows 3.1 itself. Yes, the driver is brand spanking new from the past couple of weeks. It's a very important clarification. And of course, the reason that this works is because modern PCs do still offer a surprising degree of backwards compatibility and, dare I say, historical cruft. And that means that we can essentially run DOS on a modern PC natively. And if we can run DOS, we can run Windows 3.1 on top of it. And of course, but the trouble with that being that modern day graphics card manufacturers, for some reason that I can't quite comprehend, don't make drivers for Windows 3.1, believe it or not. I know. They're missing a whole trick there. But as the cards do still support Visa BIOS extensions, it is actually possible to write a generic driver that works across pretty much all of them. And this is what we have here. So, VBE SVGA supports all 8-bit, 16-bit, 24-bit, and 32-bit graphics modes, and it's actually based on Microsoft's own sample video driver from the official Win16 driver development kit from back when 3.1 was actually current. So this has all been implemented in kind of a historically accurate way. And unlike the drivers for those early 90s cards with their limited RAM and resolutions, we now have the resources available, of course, to provide true colour and full HD in Windows 3.1 natively. There's even a screenshot on the GitHub page running something called the Calmera XP shell, which adds a Windows XP style start menu and desktop icons to Windows 3.1. VBE SVGA is open source, so you can modify it and you can build it yourself, or you can just download it and configure Windows to use it. Or if that sounds like too much hassle to you, you can, of course, just go and watch the video submitted by King of Your Fart, which does a very comprehensive job of showing it in action with various things running, including DOS applications and, of course, the all-important Doom.
Yeah, I'd noticed that. Does it run Doom? Yes, it runs Doom.
Yes, it does. It runs Doom under Windows 3.1 on a modern graphics card. So Dave, I know for a fact that you have an impressive array of PCs there. Do you actually have any Windows 3.1 machines, or will you be upgrading your current PC now that you can fully unleash the graphics capabilities of Microsoft's finest OS?
I kind of have a gap here. I have a number of PCs here, as you well know. Long time since I've spoken about them on the show. I'm tapping here. You can hear the reassuring thud of an IBM PS2 Model 30 286, and that's the oldest one that I have.
Dave.
There are older PCs, of course, but for me, I don't have much to do with those. They weren't really for games. Games you got on those older PCs were kind of incidental, whereas with the 286, you started to see games being made on the PC. And then because of some really helpful things, you can use a faster PC, and in my case, it's a 233 MMX, and you can slow it right down to be about a 386 DX. So what that means is that I can have coverage of 286, 386, 486, and a Pentium and all the rest of it from those two machines, which means I don't have a machine that really sits right where Windows 3.1 should be. However, I certainly can make one of those use 3.1, and probably I should, because for me, Windows 3.1 was something I used at work at the time, which shows my age. I'm slightly older than you, so I used Windows 3.1 at work before Windows 95 came out. And Windows 3.1 was for work. And when I got home and played in my PC, I very rarely went into Windows 3.1. I had it there, and I would go in and I'd play with the backgrounds and all the rest of it. But I don't remember using it for games. I remember DOS being for games and Windows being for productivity.
Yeah, I mean, I think my gaming experience in 3.1 was the Windows Entertainment Pack, like Chips Challenge and Ski Free and all of that stuff, but that was pretty much it, wasn't it? Like you say, it was more kind of productivity stuff.
But I do know that there were some games, particularly shareware games, for Windows 3.1, RPG type games, strategy games, and I would like to explore those one day. So I would like to get into that. Is Windows, though, just a shell running on top of DOS? Did you say that, Reese? Did you say Windows runs on top of DOS? Because you're wrong to say that, Reese. You're wrong to say that.
Yes, I have. I've been called out on this in the past. This is one of those things, isn't it, Dave? Where if you say Windows 3.1 is an operating system, someone will comment and say, "Actually, that's wrong. It's just a shell running on top of DOS." And if you say it's a shell running on top of DOS, you'll get a comment from someone saying, "Actually, it's a proper operating system." So you can't win either way.
Real mode. I know. I've done the same by saying Windows 95 runs on DOS, and people have corrected me. Now they are right, of course, and there is justification for telling people exactly how things are. But for our purposes, what happens first is you load DOS and then you load Windows, which sits on top of DOS, even if it completely takes over. Yeah, so a little bit of pedantry on that. And tone is important in YouTube comments. There is a bigger picture here that I want to talk about, though. And it's PC retro closing in on things from different directions. If you go back, I don't know, 10 years, you have got DOSBox, and that's it. You've got DOSBox or real hardware. And now we have better emulation like 86box, which emulates the actual parts of the PC, and you can build a PC to emulate, and you can emulate different parts of rather than just emulate the output. You also have things like, of course, repairing old machines. There are now projects that weren't there before, Necroware stuff. There's replacing Dallas clock batteries. There's producing the voltages that are missing from ATX power supply, all different things like that. You've got projects like the Orpheus 2, for example, or you've got projects like PicoGus, which allow you to put real hardware together. But there's also the system and a chip and small form factor things being made into these little PCs that actually are real hardware, but they're using things that are from that point of sale, for example, or industrial embedded stuff to do things, but they're doing it's real proper DOS systems. And then, of course, the final thing, which is using drivers and fixes, etc., to allow more modern stuff to actually do DOS and Windows and so on. So it's closing in from all directions, and it's no longer the case, and it hasn't been for a while, that you need to buy old machines to do it. There's different ways of doing it, and what we're seeing is this expanding, silos of different types of retro, which will eventually have lots of coverage of all these areas and mean that it gets even easier year by year to do retro.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've got modern software on old hardware and modern hardware on the old software, and entirely software-based solutions, entirely hardware-based. It's good, isn't it? It's so cool to see all of this stuff just being pushed in every possible direction and all these cool projects that people come up with. Definitely. Anyway, there we have it. Windows 3.1 in true colour and full HD on your modern-day GPU. What a time to be alive.
Housekeeping time with Dave is here. Have no fear, he'll keep things clear. It's housekeeping time with Dave.
Last week we talked about the Sega Nomad, which is the handheld Mega Drive. Wade happened to see one the next day after listening to the show at the London Gaming Market, and he put a picture on the subreddit just for us to see. And looking at it myself, it doesn't have much character to it. It's quite a generic looking shape. It looks like a kind of a third party type thing. But the idea of having an actual Mega Drive, and I should correct myself here. If I correct people saying Genesis when they should say Mega Drive, I'll correct myself here and say I should be saying Genesis here because this was a North American thing. It should be called a Genesis. Holding a Genesis in your hand in the 90s is pretty amazing. There is a slight bit of irony, though, because the picture shows it sitting on top of a PlayStation. And as Neil pointed out last week, the PlayStation was already out by the time this released, and the PlayStation blows it away.
Yeah, I mean, why wasn't the Nomad more popular? Was it just very expensive?
I think it was the timing. I think it was the timing.
Yeah.
The battery life, as you might imagine, it absolutely drank the batteries. But the idea of being able to plug it into your TV and then take it with you, I think if it had maybe come out earlier, it might have caught on. Plus, I don't think Sega was that big a deal in America as compared to the way it is in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, it's no Atari Lynx, is it?
No. The Atari Lynx was an absolute beast. Now on to briefs, and Pajako links us a rather annoying story about an arcade in Halifax which has had seemingly a lot of personal items from the owner stolen. I hope they are somehow returned.
Happy Coding ZX links us a wonderful clip from the BBC archives. This time it's from 1997, and it's about Olympic rowers playing my favourite game of all time, Doom. So they don't actually show much gameplay, which we think is possibly because it was maybe a bit too gory for daytime TV. And then another user, SRoarsFX, linked the same video again just a few hours later.
Christ of Why Do You, who was sadly not able to make it to the cave when he was in the UK, has linked us to a Polygon article on the spiritual successor to Star Fox. Now, there have been at least 8 official sequels to Star Fox already, and this one won't carry the official name, but it is being made by Giles Goddard's studio, Chuhai Labs, and it's been called Wild Blue, and Giles is one of the original programmers of the SNES classic, so maybe it'll be a bit closer to the original than the sequels were. I don't know.
Tony Hawk's hacks consoles, says MVG. And I must say, I have seen this video and I have actually run a few of these hacks on my own consoles over the years. So this was submitted by Squelch411, and it's a video all about how the Tony Hawk's games have been used over the years to jailbreak various different games consoles.
Yeah, it's just chance, I think. And and then people, once you've done 2 or 3 with Tony Hawk's, you want to find a 4th one to do it. So I think maybe that's why. But it's really interesting.
Yeah, I think those games have, because they have like character designers and level designers and stuff where you can save all of your own stuff. I think, that's kind of where the
buffer overflow type stuff. Yeah. My favourite author helped work on an Oblivion mod. So the fantastic Bethesda's Elder Scrolls game Oblivion had loads of mods. Morrowind has mods, but I think Oblivion is when the mods for the games really took off. And Terry Pratchett, author of the Discworld series, my favourite author. Sadly, he passed away around 10 years ago, and I'm still actually unable to face reading anything I've not written by him before. There's a book called The Long Earth, which I've not read, and I can't bring myself to do it because I'm still quite sore about him passing away. He worked on an Oblivion mod. He helped someone with an Oblivion mod, so I did know about it, but not the whole story. So thank you to Christ of Why Do You for linking the Eurogamer article. And there is loads more in the subreddit. If you have time to have a browse and make it your homepage, have a browse. Always something to see on there, something new being posted, and feel free to submit your own articles for us to have a look at and maybe talk about next week.
And that's available over on reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro.
Reese, I bet you've seen your fair share of magic smoke in your time.
I certainly have. Strange question.
Letting the magic smoke out is, of course, a way of saying something has gone wrong with your electronics. Something dies on you and you see wisps of smoke and that familiar firework smell. The last time I had it was when I was upgrading my Amiga, and I accidentally knocked the wire loom that was connecting the LEDs and the keyboard to the DIN at the back, and 5 volts was on there, and 5 volts went right through to ground, shorted to ground, and that caused one of the traces to turn into basically a fuse. And I got that lovely smell as it killed itself. It was an easy fix, thankfully. That disappointing feeling, though, that punch in the guts, knowing that your micro isn't going to work now. It's a lot easier to deal with these days when it's not the only micro that we have. But you get the self-recriminations. What did I do wrong? Did I plug in the wrong barrel jack? Did I try changing connectors without turning it off first? I've heard that unplugging joysticks when the Commodore 64 is on is enough to do it. I'm not quite so sure. I know that there is 5 volts on that port, so maybe you can accidentally put 5 volts to ground if you don't get it quite right. I'm not quite sure. But magic smoke back in the day when we were kids would have been awful. Thankfully, it never happened to me. I would have been heartbroken if my CPC or my ST was taken out by it. And later, when I moved to PC, it never happened, but things became less reliable on PC. I think if you were a PC owner, you had to get used to things not quite working and not knowing it's hardware, software, temperamental, time to reinstall Windows. I did for a long time have a PC that needed to warm up. So I would turn it on and it wouldn't work. I'd turn it off and back on and it might work. And off and back on and it might work. And after a few tries, it would boot up and then it would be fine. Now, these days I understand things, and I understand it's probably the motherboard or the power supply, most likely the power supply, and what to do to fix it. But I didn't know that back in the day. I just thought it was temperamental. But I just got on with it. And once it was up and running, it was fine. So, Reese, before you understood electronics, back as a kid, did anything ever die on you?
Yes. The first computer that I ever had, or that we ever had, was an Acorn Electron. And I remember, one day we just went to switch it on. We had it on the living room floor in front of the TV, switched it on, huge bang, smoke pouring out of it. You know, my mum thought it was on fire and it was going to set the house on fire, and grabbed it and went running outside with it. And so I think it was a reefer capacitor. Usual suspect, isn't it? Obviously, I didn't know that at the time, but in hindsight, yeah.
A reefer. Well, the reason we're talking about that today is a submission from G7VFY. It's a video from Dave's Garage. That's not me, it's a different Dave. There's more than one Dave in the world. And it's about reefer capacitors and magic smoke. Why vintage electronics fail so spectacularly. And it's him with a PDP 1173, which is a mini computer from the early 80s. We talk about micros all the time, but a mini computer is what was a smaller version of a mainframe before they had microcomputers, much more powerful than a microcomputer, but of course a good bit bigger. He switches it on and a whole lot of magic smoke comes from the reefer. Now, the reefer is notorious for going pop and billowing out large volumes of smoke. You commonly get them in BBC Micros and Apple II power supplies. And in fact, I've heard it said it's not a good idea to turn on a BBC Micro without dealing with the reefers first. Now, a reefer they're commonly used for AC filtering. And just like the metal inside, the heavy metal you would get inside your Atari ST, or the foil on paper in your Commodore 64, it's for interference. It's to reduce interference on the AC side of things. So there was rules about what kind of interference could be emitted from a micro back in the day, because it would affect all sorts of things, because they were on the same frequencies they would emit it on. It's not so important now, but the reefer was on the AC side and it would deal with that. And it's actually not essential for your micro. You might be surprised to know you can take the reefer out and it'll still work. And sometimes I'd imagine people have got working micros and they don't know that the reefer died on it 15 years ago, emitted all the magic smoke, and is long gone, and they just don't know it's gone there. So I think sometimes people will see the magic smoke and then be shocked to find an hour later they turn it back on, it's working. But it's a fascinating video. It's not the only way that you can get magic smoke from a computer, though, Reese. How else might you get it?
It isn't, Dave. No, and you've been very mean to me here and put me on the spot and made me confess to something that I haven't actually publicly talked about before. But I'm going to. This is it. So this is an exclusive. I bought a he's laughing because he knows what's coming. I bought a PC-98 from Japan, 100-volt machine. You can probably see where this is going.
100 volts.
I think 100 volts or 110 volts in Japan. I think it's actually 100 volts. Oh, it was.
I think it is. It is 100 volts.
Yeah.
What voltage do we use in the UK?
240.
So you obviously you wouldn't put 240 volts into 110.
I mean, you would think that they would use different connectors, wouldn't you? But
why?
Because they're different voltages.
No.
To prevent very silly people from putting the wrong voltage into the wrong hole, Dave.
What happened?
I was in a rush and I was swapping things around. I was in the middle of filming a video and I picked up the wrong cable and very absent-mindedly plugged it into the back. And there was a very loud bang and just a little bit of smoke. But it turned out it was actually just the fuse in the power supply. So didn't destroy that machine, thankfully. In fact, I'm sat here looking at it now. So at least it wasn't quite as catastrophic as it could have been. But I'd imagine with things with discrete power supplies like that, putting the wrong AC voltage in is likely to kill the power supply, but far less likely to spread the pain into the actual micro itself. So I guess it's not quite so likely. But that's where the magic smoke can come from as well. It's a fascinating video. It's really quite interesting. It is worth a watch. So if you want to find out more about reefers, as long as you don't have a childhood memory of magic smoke taking your fun away, then give that a watch. Now, on to our community question of the week from last week. Now, Duncan's put the question, and this is true, Dave proclaimed the back catalogue of Acclaim to be, and he's put in quotes, a bit ropey, but asked you to tell him why he's wrong.
So I'm going to disable contest mode, and we will see. The top answer just says classic Dave. Well, I hope people aren't offended when I have a little bit of fun with that. Happy Coding ZX is in the top answer. He says, looking through the catalogue is a mixed bag, but there are some real hidden gems in there, not least being Revolt, the spiritual successor to Micro Machines, and still has a loyal fan base to this day. And that's a good point. There are some gems in the back catalogue. It's a lot of snash in there, but there's some good ones in there as well.
Yeah, I should just point out, Dave, as well, there is a reply to that from FSCKIT, pointing out that Fuskit, yeah, of course, that there's a re-implemented version. There's a remastered version of that you can go and download and play today as well. So that looks quite cool. I have to check that out.
Windows Online Edition and Classic Edition, 64-bit, Mac OS, Android, and even GNU Linux, because it's not just Linux, it's GNU Linux.
GNU Linux.
Comments. GNU. Who's next?
It's me, Thyroid. That's not one I've come across yet. Okay.
Is it not meth? It's Methroid.
It's Metheroid. It's me thyroid.
It's me thyroid. Okay.
It's me thyroid. It's Metheroid. I'm losing it. It's very late in the day.
Let us know.
Alien 3, the side-scrolling run-and-gun game based on a movie that famously had no guns in it. And, of course, that most quality of fighting games, Street Fighter the movie.
Are they good games? And that was that the suggestion there?
I don't know.
Lord Borak says, Alien Trilogy for me. Played it at uni on my mate's brand new Saturn in the dark with just a lava lamp glowing in the corner. Many a jump scare and crapping of pants ensued. Apart from Mortal Kumquat, can't think of much else, so probably agree with you, Dave. Rob Crowther says, well, he's not wrong. I'm now feeling bad. I'm picking on them now, and I feel bad. Generation Pixel has a go at me, though. Good. Glad someone did. How can Dave say the Acclaim catalogue is a bit ropey? One game alone disproves this. Rise of the Robots. To be fair, there were some bangers. Syndicate, for example. Syndicate was bullfrog.
Syndicate, yeah. Come on, Dave.
They published it.
Okay.
Yeah. NBA Jam.
Oh.
Super Smash TV and the SNES. BMX, Triple X, enough said. Yeah. Oh, someone else, so Dave was right. I'm always right. I'm not always right. Thank you for your submissions. If you'd like to go and read the rest of them, there will be a lot more by the time this comes out. Go to our subreddit. And as Reese told you earlier on, reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro. And on to this week's question of the week. Tell us your stories of your hardware failure. Was it magic smoke? And bonus points if it was your own fault. Thank you, Reese, for coming on. Thank you very much for coming on short notice.
It's been a pleasure, as always.
Was thrown together at the last minute, but we made it. The show must go on, and you did get an episode this week. We hate when you don't. Neil will be back next week. There will be a guest on next week as well from the United States of America. Yeah, and guess we've never had on before. Someone I'm a fan of. So you'll get to see a new guest next week. But thank you very much for listening. We'll see you next week. Reese, we'll see you on Reese Rambles. And have you got a video coming out this week?
It's not looking likely, Dave, I have to say.
Oh, yeah,
you
had a terrible day at work. Yeah, well, Reese Rambles, if you want more Reese, he has a huge back catalogue of his podcasts, and he'll have a new one out at 2 minutes to midnight every Friday night, well, Saturday morning kind of thing. Bye.
Bye.
I'm waving. Reese is waving. See you next week, folks.
This Week in Retro was presented by Neil from the Retro Collective and Dave. It was produced by me, Duncan Styles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcaster, including Apple Podcast and Spotify. And the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/This Week in Retro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. If you watch This Week in Retro on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.